Hi there, Nigel Saunders here. You're about to step into the bonsai zone. In the last video that featured these trees, our club bonsai show was about a month and a half away. The club show is now only a few days away, so I'm going to do all the detail and the final work to this penjing landscape. The first detail I'll talk about is the Land Rover. The Land Rover I had in the planting before was a Matchbox toy. It was unpainted and it looked okay, but it wasn't very realistic looking. So I kind of went maybe a little overboard and I started looking around for better Land Rover models. I wanted a classic safari style Land Rover, and the first one I came across was on eBay, and this little metal one. A really nice model. The windshield's in the aluminum frame, the wheels are painted nice, it's got a spare tire on the hood, it's got a license plate and a grill. Yeah, a really nice little metal model. I wasn't sure if this Land Rover was going to be shipped in time for our bonsai show, so I decided I'd try painting up the Matchbox one. Here's the Land Rover Discovery painted up. It's a later model. I was kind of wanting the classic Land Rover style, but I painted this up as a backup and to see how it would look. And it looks okay. I'm fairly happy with it. When I was in the hobby store, I found this Land Rover model. It's a plastic styrene model, and it was more of a military style one. It had a canvas back on it and a trailer behind it. So I thought, well, it'd be nice to build this and possibly use it in my African style landscape. It's 1/76 scale. So I thought, I was wondering how big it would be. I thought, well, maybe it's going to be too big. But it turned out to be quite a small model. Here's the size of the box it came in, and here's the completed model up top. Turns out I didn't have to be worried at all. The model was very small, and it fits in nicely with my landscape. For my little Land Rover model, I had to buy paints. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different colors of paint, and a set of nice artist brushes. So with the model kit, I think that kit cost me $12. The brushes were another $12 or $13, and the paints were about, I think they were about $1.50 each. So yeah, it ended up to be a fairly expensive model in the end. The Land Rover had about 21 pieces that I had to assemble, and they're pretty small pieces, so I had to glue it all together using a big magnifying glass so I could see all the parts. Using an X-Acto knife, I went in and I carved out the sides of the canvas top to look like an open frame, so it looks more like a safari type vehicle. I chose a nice kind of retro blue color for the paint scheme, and I made, a reddish mud in the wheels and a bit of weathering along the sides to make it look like it had been on safari. So I'm happy with the way it turned out. I kind of like the retro feel to it, and I like the little bit of customization I did to the back of it, making it open with the windows. I've decided to use the retro blue one in my landscape. With this landscape, there was a nice kind of opening here, and I think the Land Rover looks really good placed far back on the hill there. So I'll show you where I wanted to put it. I like the Land Rover position back here somewhere. It looks like a nice little spot here that you would set up camp at the end of a long day. You'll notice I'm working indoors today, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that when you bring a tree from outside to inside, there's less light, and all the foliage on your trees goes a darker green color. This happens with pines and deciduous trees. It just makes the leaves look a nice dark green color and makes them look better for the show. Another reason is, after I've done all the detail work to the penjing landscape, I don't want birds to come and land and start picking through the moss for worms and kicking all my moss off. I don't want the tree to be outside in case we get a heavy rain and it might destroy all the work I've done. It's time now to start working on the landscape. So I'm going to start by pruning up the trees. In the last video I did a hedge type pruning where I just kind of prune them to a profile, cutting through leaves and branches and not really caring where I cut, just getting it in shape. And now, because it's getting very close to the show time, I have to be very precise in my pruning. I can't prune through leaves. I have to prune between them. So it's going to be a detailed pruning. It'll take longer than just a hedge type pruning. I'll go in and prune all the individual branches and shoots that are sticking out and shape the top canopy to my liking. Step one will be to get my tweezers, and I'll pick out all the yellow leaves that are in the canopy. So you just want to prune out any leaves that are going yellow or look not as good as a fresh new leaf. I've just picked out a large one that was left over from when the tree was growing inside last winter. Detailed work on a tree like this takes a long time. You need to give yourself several hours to go through the tree and get it looking show ready. It's definitely something you don't want to leave to the last minute. I've seen a lot of trees come into shows and people are setting up their trees and pruning them and trying to get them ready for the show at the same time. And that never works out very well. It's nice to have all the work done beforehand, and when you get to the show, just worry about setting your trees up. In a bonsai show, it's always better to have less trees prepared well than more trees prepared poorly. Next, I'm going underneath the canopy and looking for leaves that are on the bottom side that are going yellow. These ones. I'm also cleaning out spider webs. I love spiders, but spider webs in bonsai don't look good in a bonsai show. So you got to clean out all your cobwebs that are in the branches, any pieces of leaves that have fallen down on top of your branches. My next step is to remove this wire that's holding this one branch in position. It's fine to leave wire on your bonsai tree for a show if it's neat and tidy and your branch still needs the wire on. But in my case, I'm hoping this branch is set in this position and there's no need to keep the wire on for the show. So I'm going to remove it. The safest way to remove wire from your bonsai trees is to come in with a pair of small wire cutters and clip the wire in several places so the little pieces just fall off. It is possible to unwind the wire successfully without damaging the tree if you're really careful. I have a pair of wire cutters. I'm going to regrind the nose eventually so they're more precise for removing wire on bonsai trees. But I'll see how it goes as they are. I'll come in and I'll try and clip the links. There's one. So this piece just comes off. And I'll work down the branch, trying to remove all my wire. There's all the pieces of wire I'm left over with. You can recycle all this wire, so I just save it up and then take it to the metal place. My branch stayed nicely in position, so the wire did its job. It's time now to start pruning the canopy, getting my overall shape how I want it, and cleaning up all the individual pads of foliage. Up top in the canopy, you can see I've lost a lot of the definition in my separate foliage pads. The trees filled in again. So I'm going to come in, I'm just going to keep them separated just a little bit. So I'll just prune out some of these shoots that have grown into each other. I don't want an obvious line where I have tufts of foliage here and there. I want it subtle, so it all kinds of blends in nicely. But I do want a little bit of definition. Sometimes it just means removing a few leaves that are crossing. I've got my slight separation between all the pads now. So now it's time to go in and prune the overall shape of the canopy. Before I start pruning the canopy, I'm stepping back and looking at the shape of the canopy and deciding what I want to do and how I want to improve it. So I think one thing it could use is a little more of a rounded shape. So I think I'm a little high right here at the ends. I'm a little high here and a little high here. So it could be rounded just a little more. I think that would give it a better look. So I'm starting the pruning, and I'm always looking to clip between leaves so I don't have leaves cut in half. And you always need to step back and see how you're progressing. So I'm bringing this foliage pad down as low as I can get it. These trees are Serissa foetidas, and I'm styling them to look like African acacia trees. And not only does the top of the canopy have a profile, but I can also prune away leaves to give the bottom of the canopy a profile also. So we'll be dealing with that later as part of the canopy pruning. I have the left side here pruned up to shape. It's looking pretty good. So now I'm going to start cleaning up the underside of the canopy. On the underside, I have some branches hanging down, which spoils the profile. You want to be able to see all that nice branch structure underneath the canopy. So I'm going to prune that off shorter. There's some leaves hanging down here, so they need to be removed also. That helps tidy up the underside of the canopy. There's a lot of leaves in here that need to be removed, and possibly even some of those shoots. I want the upper canopy to be a thin layer, so I don't have a lot of foliage down lower. So there's some right here that needs to be removed, like that. Some more lower leaves. There's still some inside here that need to be removed. Little suckers that have grown. I've cleaned up the canopy on the left side of the tree now, both the bottom and the top. And I think you can see the comparison of the two sides, that this side looks much better. So now I'm going to start on the right-hand side of the tree and try and get it to match the same style. I've got the right-hand side of the canopy pruned up now, and it looks a lot better. It looks more symmetrical. The style of the left and the right-hand side kind of match each other. I had to remove some of the lower branches underneath here that were getting kind of hanging down too much. And I think the canopy has enough asymmetry that it looks very natural. If you made it too symmetrical, the tree might start looking a little artificial. So I've still got some work to do in the canopy. I'm going to try and get some more separation in the layers up top, height-wise. So some of these lower layers will be flatter, and a little more cleanup underneath. Some of these lower leaves, I'm just coming in with my fingers and plucking out the leaves just to clean up the underside of the canopy. I have the canopy pruned up on the main tree now. I'm happy with the way it looks. I'm happy with the way it's progressing. So I'm going to work on the canopies on the smaller trees now. I don't want the smaller trees to be exact copies of the main trees. I want them to have their own style, but I still want them to look like flat-top acacia trees. I've got all the background trees pruned up the best they can. Those trees are younger than the main trees, so they're a little bit behind in development, but hopefully they'll catch up over the years. Especially my new little cutting way back here. It's not much to look at yet, but yeah, hopefully it'll get there. The tree part of the video is done, and I'd have to say this is probably the easier part, because now I've got to start on the actual landscape and get it all pruned up and miniature looking. An important part in this landscape is the dirt road that comes from the back of the landscape, curves around between these trees, and sweeps around to the front of the planting. I want the road to be that dusty red soil that you see in Africa, and between the two tire marks, I want moss to be growing, so it looks like grass growing between the two tire ruts. I think that'll give the road a really nice look to it. So that's where I'm going to start off with. We're going to work on this pathway or this road through the landscape. In the last video, I was filing up a terracotta pot to get my reddish type African soil. And when I was at the baseball diamond, I thought, wait a minute, the turpis in the baseball diamond is this nice reddy color. So I went and collected a jar full of it, and I'm going to use this in my roads and as my soil. I've pruned the sedum plants up twice since the last video, so they're very fast growing. I'll do a final prune to them today. But what I'm going to work on first is to get this moss back trim and level so it's not so high. If you imagine the scale of a vehicle here, how high some of this foliage is getting. It's like almost twice the height of the vehicle. So definitely got to prune that down. With the Land Rover in place here, you can easily see what moss is growing too high, what bushes are too high compared to the size of the vehicle. With the Land Rover position back here, you can see that the moss back here would be higher than a person standing here. So it's got to be all pruned down so it looks more like grass or small bushes. Right now it looks like the Land Rover's in the middle of a lush tropical rainforest. To prune the moss up, I'm going to come in with my curved surgical scissors and just trim the tops. I don't want anything overhanging the lip of the pot, so I'm going to clear it all back from the edge of the pot here also. And again, we're going to leave some tufts of moss higher than others, so it looks like clumps of grass. We don't want it all even like a mowed lawn. We want it to look very natural. The areas where I'm completely trimming the moss away will get top dressed with that red turpis soil. I'm going to start roughing in the ruts in the road where the tires would go. And again, I want to use forced perspective, so it's going to start off wider than the actual vehicle is, and then it'll taper off, and when it gets to the back of the planting, it'll be the scale of the Land Rover. So I think if I start with the ruts about this far apart and then just taper them back. So, and I also want to make the tire tracks a little deeper so they're kind of sunk in from, use, and we want to leave that patch of moss in the middle. I've got the road all roughed in now, so I definitely have to start pruning that moss at the back. It's very thick and long, so I'll start doing that next. I'll start by just sort of separating some clumps because we do want some of this moss to look like bushes. Some of these little bits of sedum where I pruned them off last time rooted, and I've got a few stray ones over here that I'll have to either keep or get rid of. I'll have to decide. As I'm pruning the moss, I'm leaving it a little longer at the front and making it really short at the back, so it's like forced perspective. So it things in the distance look smaller. The moss in my distant cope, or small hill, will also get pruned nice and short and trim, so it looks like it's in the distance. I don't want the moss hiding all the rocks back here. That pre-trimming of the moss last time I pruned this helped keep the moss green all the way through. If you left the moss really long and then trimmed it just before a show, you might get down into brown areas of the moss. So it's important to keep your moss trimmed up reasonably throughout the year. I'm making good progress on the landscape, pruning all the moss up, getting it nice and tight. It's a little too lush at the moment. I'm going to get all the height of the moss correct first, get it pruned tightly at the back, a little more loosely at the front, and then I'll start cutting away to make all the tufts of grass, and then we'll start adding our sand color. I'm going to start adding my reddish sand or soil color to the roadway just to get an idea of what it looks like. So I'll just use a spoon and I'll bring it up to the level of the moss. So far I'm liking the look of it. It'll take a little while to get everything in place and looking really good. But yeah, so far I'm happy with the color and the texture looks good. I'm going to do some work around the base of the trees now, getting rid of all that moss again that's growing up the trunk. I want the red soil underneath the tree too. I don't want it lush looking underneath the tree. I've picked off all the moss around the base of the tree, and now I'm going to give it a dry brushing to try and get more moss off the roots and the trunk. You can see how the moss holds the moisture in the bark around the trunk of the tree. So once those roots dry, they'll lighten up and blend in with the trunk better. Next, I'll wet my toothbrush and give it a wet clean down. And you can see the surface roots are looking pretty good. They're fairly radial, but they also look quite wild. When I was pruning the upper canopy, I noticed some of the branches up there were a little discolored. So I'm going to give them a scrub also. That's looking better. Gets rid of any algae buildup on the bark, so they don't get that green look to them. They're more of a nice tan color. I'll build up the soil around the base of the tree now with my reddish soil, keeping the roots partially exposed. And then I'll just give it a spray to wash the dust off the surface roots. I'm adding the ruts in the road now just by pushing down with the largest Land Rover here. Again, trying to keep the force perspective going. I'm still quite high with my bushes here. Yeah, if you imagine a person, they would be way too high, so I'm going to prune those back. Here's a shot of the landscape now. I've got a lot of the elements to the right height and in perspective, like all the bushes and moss. So now I'm going to go in and tidy up all the moss around the copy. I want, right now it looks like a mowed lawn around the hill. So I'm going to go in and create all my little tufts everywhere. I'm also going to take my turpis outside, my red turpis, and I'm going to sift it so I have some fine dust that I can put down. The coarser stones of the turpis are fine up front. They look good, but as it goes towards the distance, I don't want those coarse stones. I want force perspective, so I want some fine dust that I can put down in the distance as my red soil. I've sifted my red colored turpis into two grades, a fine powder and more of a gravel type. The really large stones, I'm just going to use them in my regular bonsai soil, not in this planting. I'm going to give the road a layer of the fine powder now. You have to keep in mind the scale of your planting. So some of these stones, if you imagine a person standing there, would be quite large rocks. So the powder will look more like red African soil. And I can work that all in between my moss to change the look of the landscape from a lush green one to more of a dry savanna type landscape. I've got the base layer of my red soil down now. It makes the landscape look a lot more arid or dry. And I'm going to wet it to settle it all in, so I'll just mist it with my mister. And then I'll start pruning the tufts of moss on the hillside. So here I come with the sprayer. Well, the Land Rovers would really have a tough time getting through that mud now. So I'm just adding my little tufts in here, making it a more of a natural look, so it doesn't look like someone ran a lawnmower over it. A good method of tidying up your moss is just to get the toothbrush and just kind of brush it out a bit so it gets standing up nice and straight, and you can get all your loose bits of moss brushed out. I've got a branch on the main tree here that I want to look dead, so I'm going to remove all the foliage off it. I've removed all signs of life from this branch now, so now it looks like a dead limb underneath the canopy of the tree. Here's a view of my African landscape now. So my next step, I'm going around the planting and looking at all the little details, picking out stones I don't like, pruning little bits of moss, really tiny finishing touches. That'll make the landscape more miniature looking for the show. Here's an example. Some of the grass between the ruts in the roadway is just too high. So I'm just gonna prune it off shorter. I can round this bush just a little more. Again, a subtle little change, but makes a big difference in the overall look of it. Especially when you get close in with the camera. With the camera zoomed in, you start to see all the little details. Like this tuft of grass here isn't separated enough from the other bush. Now we can get a little bit more sand in here, or soil. Some of the rocks in the roadway are a little large, so I'm going to pick those out. So just little details that you only see when you're looking at a specific area of the landscape. The landscape's all ready for the show now. Let's go in for a closer look. Completed all the work on my landscape, so this is the first of my bonsai trees that's ready for our club show, and that's the end of part 1, so stay tuned for part 2. Thanks for watching. I'm Nigel Saunders in the Bonsai Zone.